The plan was simple, cheap, adventurous, and fun. My best friend and I had always been the kind of girls who didn't mind a little discomfort if it meant freedom. We had spent our childhoods roaming forests, setting up makeshift shelters, and sleeping under the stars. Camping wasn't just something we did, it was second nature. So when we turned 16 and finally had a break from school, we decided to do something bigger than just another weekend in the woods behind our houses. We bought train tickets to France, stuffing our backpacks with the essentials. A small tent, sleeping bags, a few changes of clothes, cheap food that wouldn't spoil too quickly, and 2 knives, just in case. We didn't have much money, so the plan was to camp in the wild, just like we did at home. The journey started off exactly how we hoped. We spent nights in train stations when we had to, sometimes curling up on benches or finding corners where security wouldn't kick us out. Other nights, we got lucky. Bartenders at beachside cafes let us crash under the shelter of their bars after they closed for the night. Strangers were kind, and for a while we felt invincible, like the whole world was just one big open space for us to explore. By the time we reached the small Mediterranean town, we were exhausted but excited. The place was quiet, the kind of town where tourists passed through but never really stayed. The beach stretched wide and empty, with only a few scattered concrete structures along the sand. Mostly old garbage can holders and small fishing spots. The moment we stepped onto the beach, we knew it was perfect. The air was thick with the smell of salt and damp earth, and out over the ocean, the sky was heavy with clouds. A storm was coming. We set up our tent near a row of concrete pillars, using them to anchor the tent down with extra rope. The last thing we wanted was to wake up and find ourselves rolling toward the water. As we worked, we noticed an old man sitting nearby with a fishing rod. He was watching us. We didn't think much of it. People watched us all the time, especially older men who seemed to find the sight of 2 teenage girls on their own either amusing or concerning. He waved. We waved back. That was it. By nightfall, the wind had picked up. The sound of the ocean had grown louder, crashing against the shore in thick, rolling waves. The tent flapped and pulled against the ropes, but it held. We ate quickly. Sheepkin food heated over a tiny camping stove, then cleaned up and crawled into our sleeping bags, exhausted. The wind outside howled. The rain came in bursts, light at first, then heavier, hammering against the fabric of the tent. I drifted in and out of sleep, half aware of the storm raging outside, half lost in dreams of home. Then I felt a poke. Not the kind you can ignore. A sharp, deliberate jab against my shoulder. I opened my eyes. My best friend was awake, sitting up in her sleeping bag, her face barely visible in the dim light. She didn't say anything, just looked at me wide-eyed, then pointed at the side of the tent. There was movement. The fabric of the tent shifted, brushing against something or someone outside. I felt my stomach drop. Another poke. Not a random rustling from the wind. This was different, slow, purposeful. Someone outside was pressing against the tent wall, tracing along the fabric as if feeling for something inside. I reached for my knife. My best friend did the same. We sat there, frozen, gripping the handles so tightly our hands ached. The movement continued, a slow, dragging motion along the thin material of the tent. A finger? A hand? My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I wanted to scream, but my throat was locked up. My body stuck somewhere between fight and flight. The storm roared around us, the wind pushing hard against the tent, but the movement outside didn't stop. Then I heard it, just barely over the sound of the rain. Breathing, not ours, someone else's, right outside. The air inside the tent felt suffocating. My skin crawled with a deep, instinctual panic. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just some drunk guy stumbling across our tent by accident. Then something changed. The movement stopped. Silence. I couldn't tell if that was better or worse. I don't know what came over me, but I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I whispered, "Screw it," then reached for the zipper. The tent flap came open in one quick motion. There he was, the fisherman, standing directly outside our tent in the storm, soaking wet, his face barely visible in the darkness. For a second, we just stared at each other. My grip on the knife tightened. He didn't move. Then, as if nothing was weird about any of this, he spoke. He told us there were rats. He pointed to the pot we had left outside, explaining that he was just trying to wake us up because he saw them crawling over our food. He smiled a little, like he expected us to be relieved or grateful. I didn't say anything. Neither did my best friend. We just kept staring. Then I asked him why he was still here, why he was on the beach in the middle of the night, in a storm. His answer made my skin crawl. He said he was waiting for his friends. They were going night fishing. 2 in the morning. In the rain, I felt my best friend shift beside me. Tense. Ready. We were both thinking the same thing. Lies. We told him, quickly, without hesitation, that our parents were in a hotel in town, that they were expecting to hear from us in the morning, that we weren't alone. I don't know if he believed us, but he didn't argue. He just stood there, watching. We started packing. Fast. The wind yanked at our tent, pulling it so hard the ropes strained against the concrete. The fisherman just stood there, his hands shoved into his pockets, watching us scramble to shove everything back into our bags. Then the tent ripped free. It snapped loose from the ropes, caught the wind like a sail, and flew straight into the ocean. There was nothing we could do, no time to save it. We just grabbed whatever we could, shoved it into our bags, and ran. We didn't look back. We ran through the rain, through the empty streets of the town, until we found a place. An old patio surrounded by walls. We collapsed onto the wet stone floor, shaking, panting, soaked to the bone. The storm raged on, but we were away from him. We didn't sleep. By morning, we tried to find a hostel. We walked the streets, exhausted and miserable, but nothing felt safe anymore. The town wasn't big. If he was still there, we might run into him again. So we made a decision. We were done. We took the next train home. We had planned for 2 weeks. We lasted 4 days. I barely remember the ride back. Just the feeling of being drained, hollow, and exhausted in a way I had never felt before. We didn't talk much about it after. What was there to say? We had been lucky. Nothing happened, but something could have, and that was the scariest part. There was something about the way the pines swallowed sound that made the forest feel endless. I had been camping before, plenty of times, but something about this place sat heavy in my chest. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the way the trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting together to block out most of the sky. Or maybe it was just my own nerves getting the best of me. Either way, I was out here now, committed to a weekend in the woods, and turning back wasn't an option. I had driven 6 hours to get here. A friend had recommended this spot, a remote stretch of national forest land, miles from any designated campsites. It was supposed to be untouched, pure, the kind of place where you wouldn't see another person for days. That was exactly what I wanted. A break from everything. No work, no phone calls, no obligations. Just me, my gear, and the quiet. I parked on the side of a narrow dirt road, the last one I had seen in nearly an hour. There wasn't an official trailhead, just a faint path where others had probably walked before. I grabbed my pack, locked the truck, and started hiking. The terrain was rough, a steep incline right from the start. Dry pine needles crunched under my boots, and the air smelled sharp, like resin and earth. The sun was already low, stretching long shadows through the trees. I wanted to set up camp before dark, so I pushed forward without stopping. About 2 miles in, I found the perfect spot. A small clearing, mostly flat, with a fallen tree that could serve as a makeshift bench. The forest was thick around me, but the trees opened up just enough for a good view of the sky. I set down my pack and got to work. I pitched my tent first. It was a simple one-person setup, quick and easy. Then, I gathered firewood, breaking off dead branches and stacking them in a pile. The air was already cooling, and I could feel the dampness creeping in. By the time I got a fire going, the sun had completely vanished behind the treetops. Sitting there, watching the flames dance, I finally felt the tension in my shoulders ease. This was exactly what I had needed. No noise, no distractions, just the fire, the trees, and the distant sound of the wind moving through the branches. It was around midnight when I decided to turn in. The fire had burned low, just glowing embers now, and the cold had set in. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped the tent up tight, and let the quiet lull me to sleep. I woke up suddenly. No sound, no reason, just that strange, gut-deep feeling that something wasn't right. I stayed still, listening. The forest was dead silent. No wind, no rustling branches, no distant calls of night animals, just thick, pressing silence. Then I heard it, a single, deliberate footstep. Not an animal, not the scatter of a squirrel or the soft padding of a deer. This was slow, heavy, careful. My heart hammered in my chest. I strained to listen, barely breathing. The sound had come from behind my tent, somewhere in the trees. Then, another step, closer. I reached for the knife I always kept inside my sleeping bag. My fingers wrapped around the handle, and I gripped it tight, my palm already slick with sweat. For what felt like hours, I stayed frozen, waiting, but the sound never came again. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. Maybe a falling branch, maybe a raccoon, maybe nothing at all. I didn't sleep much after that. Morning came slow. The air was cold, damp with dew, and the fire had long since died out. I crawled out of the tent, stretching the stiffness from my muscles. The forest looked different in the daylight, less intimidating, more familiar. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Whatever I thought I heard last night, it didn't matter now. It was a new day. I spent the morning hiking, following a game trail deeper into the woods. The land dipped and rose in uneven ridges, and I found myself sweating despite the cool air. I had no real destination, just the urge to explore. It wasn't until I circled back toward camp that I noticed something strange. The ground near my tent, where I had cleared away sticks and leaves, was disturbed. The dirt was scuffed, like something had been dragged through it. I stared at it, my skin crawling. It wasn't a huge disturbance, nothing obvious, but I knew it hadn't been like that before. I forced myself to shake it off. Maybe I had done it myself, half asleep in the night. Maybe an animal had wandered through. Maybe it was nothing. I built the fire back up, made some coffee, and told myself to stop being paranoid. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my tent, staring at the nylon ceiling, listening. The fire outside had burned down again, leaving only faint light flickering against the trees. The night was quiet, too quiet. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard it again. That slow, deliberate footstep. It was closer this time. I felt my pulse slam in my ears. My knife was already in my hand. My fingers clenched around the handle so tight they ached. Another step. The sound was just outside my tent now. I held my breath, barely blinking. The fabric of the tent was thin, barely a barrier between me and whatever was out there. Then silence. I waited, counted the seconds in my head. 10, 20, full minute, nothing. And then, just when I started to think it was over, the zipper of my tent moved. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second, I was frozen. The next, I was lunging. I ripped the zipper down myself and burst out of the tent, knife in hand, ready to fight. But there was nothing there. The fire was just embers now, casting faint, shifting light across the clearing. The trees stood still, dark shadows stretching between them. I turned in a slow circle, my breath ragged. The forest was empty, but I knew, without a doubt, that I hadn't imagined it. Something had been there, and it had wanted in. I didn't stay to find out what it was. I packed up my gear in record time, shoving everything into my pack with shaking hands. My truck was 2 miles away, but I didn't care. I'd walk all night if I had to. I left the fire burning, too panicked to put it out. I didn't care about leaving a perfect campsite. I just needed to go. The hike back was the longest of my life. Every sound made my skin crawl. Every shadow looked like something watching. The trees felt like they were closing in. When I finally reached my truck, I threw my gear into the back, jumped in, and locked the doors. Only then, sitting there in the driver's seat, did I finally let myself breathe. I never found out what was out there. I don't think I want to, but I do know one thing. I wasn't alone in those woods. Camping in Ocala National Forest was supposed to be fun. That was the whole point. Just a bunch of high school kids, away from parents, no responsibilities, no rules. Just a weekend of drinking, bad food, and pretending we knew how to survive in the woods. We had planned it for weeks, figured out the rides, the gear, who was bringing what. It was supposed to be simple. Set up tents, make a fire, tell dumb stories, then go home on Sunday with a couple of mosquito bites and a good memory. But Ocala is different from the places we were used to. Florida forests aren't the cute kind. The ones with nice open trails and little wooden benches for hikers to rest on. Ocala is dense, wild. The kind of place where people go missing. The kind of place where the trees grow too close together, where palmettos and vines twist up in thick, knotted walls. The kind of place where, if you stray too far from camp at night, you might not find your way back. We got there late in the afternoon. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not completely silent. There were bugs, birds, the occasional rustling of wind through the leaves. But it wasn't like the woods back home. There was something different in the air, heavier, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. We set up camp in a clearing near a small creek. It was a good spot. Flat, plenty of room for the tents, far enough from the main roads that no park rangers would bother us. As the sun went down, we built a fire, cooked hot dogs, passed around a bottle that someone had smuggled in. It was exactly the kind of night we'd been hoping for. At some point, the idea came up to go exploring. It was late, probably close to midnight. A few of us were getting bored just sitting around the fire, and someone mentioned a trail they had seen earlier that led off into the woods. It didn't take much convincing. We grabbed a couple of flashlights, told the rest of the group we'd be back soon, and headed out. The trail was narrow, winding through thick trees and brush. Our flashlights barely cut through the darkness, just little cones of light bouncing across the ground. The deeper we went, the quieter everything seemed to get. The bugs still hummed, but it felt more distant, more unnatural. Eventually, we reached the edge of the forest. The trees thinned out, and suddenly, we were standing just off the shoulder of a two-lane highway. There was no traffic, no streetlights, just an endless stretch of pavement disappearing in both directions. The sky was huge above us, stars scattered like shattered glass. We sat down in the grass, laughing about something stupid, enjoying the weird, surreal feeling of being there. Deep in the woods, but right next to civilization. That's when the car came. At first, it was just headlights in the distance. A single vehicle moving fast. We didn't think much of it. Probably just some local heading home, or a trucker passing through. Then, as it got closer, someone, maybe Rob, whispered, "Get down." It was an instinctive thing, no real reason, just some teenage survival mechanism kicking in. So we did. We crouched low in the grass, watching as the car's headlights swept past. And then the brake lights came on. The car slowed, stopped, doors opened, slammed shut. Then came the footsteps, heavy, fast, running toward us. There was no hesitation. We ran. The forest was right there, a wall of darkness waiting to swallow us up. We bolted toward it, crashing through the underbrush, branches slapping against our faces, vines snagging at our legs. I could hear them behind us, the footsteps on pavement, then the snap and crack of bodies forcing their way through the trees. They were following us. I didn't know who they were, and I didn't care. All I knew was that they were chasing us. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept running. I could hear Rob and the others just ahead, their footsteps pounding against the forest floor. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit were getting louder. Then suddenly, Rob stopped short. I barely had time to react before I almost slammed into him. He was frozen, arms outstretched, mouth open in a silent scream, and right in front of him, suspended in the air like some nightmare from hell, was a banana spider the size of my hand. The web stretched between two trees, its silk shimmering faintly in the dim light, and in the center, unmoving, sat the spider, long legs spread wide, massive body hanging in the air like a trap. For a split second, everything else faded. The footsteps, the fear, the chase, all that existed was that spider. And then instinct kicked back in. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I slammed into Rob with my full weight, shoving him straight through the web. There was a second, just a second, where everything seemed to freeze. The web snapped. The spider flailed, tumbling off into the darkness. Rob let out a strangled sound, half scream, half gag. And then we were moving again. I didn't look back. I didn't check to see if they were still behind us. I just ran. Branches tore at my arms. Roots caught at my feet. I tripped, fell, scrambled back up. My lungs felt like they were going to explode. My heart was a hammer in my chest. And then suddenly there were voices, familiar voices. The camp. We burst into the clearing like animals, crashing through the undergrowth and into the light of the fire. People turned, startled. Someone shouted. I collapsed, hands on my knees, gasping for air. Behind us, the forest was still, silent. There was no sign of pursuit, no crashing through the underbrush, no footsteps, just the quiet hum of the forest, the distant crackle of the fire, the stunned faces of our friends. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. We sat by the fire, jumpy, paranoid, listening for any sound of movement in the woods. But nothing came. By morning, it almost felt like a dream, like something our minds had exaggerated in the dark. But when we went back to look for footprints near the road, we found them. Deep impressions in the dirt, heavy, human, leading from the pavement into the trees. We packed up and left early. No one argued. On the drive home, I kept thinking about that moment. The way the car had stopped. The way the doors had slammed shut. The way they had run toward us. We would never know who they were, or what they had planned to do. But I knew one thing for sure. They hadn't been out there for a friendly chat. Camping had never been my first choice for a weekend getaway, but I wasn't against it either. I enjoyed being out in nature, sitting by a fire, and feeling the quiet that only deep woods could provide. So when a big group of us planned a weekend trip, I didn't hesitate to join. There were about 45 of us, old friends and friends of friends, meeting up at a popular campground a few hours out of the city. We arrived late in the afternoon, the sun dipping behind the trees as we pulled in. The main campground was already packed. Tents, campers, and RVs filled every designated spot, and the fire pits were already smoking with the early stages of dinner. I wasn't too worried, though. There was still space across the road, closer to the river. In a way, it seemed better, more peaceful, away from the noise and chaos of 40-plus people drinking, laughing, and staying up late. I was sharing a tent with 2 other women, both of whom I had camped with before. We weren't best friends, but we got along well. We drove over to the quieter side of the campground, following a dirt road that wound through tall trees and sloped down toward the riverbank. There were a few open spots there, nothing fancy, just clearings with fire pits and enough flat ground for a couple of tents. The trees here were thicker, the underbrush heavier, felt more secluded. We parked and got to work setting up. Our tent was a standard 3-person dome tent, roomy enough for sleeping bags and a little extra space for bags. The fire ring was about 10 feet away, a circle of stones filled with ash from past campers. The river was maybe 30 yards off, rushing steady and loud enough to mask any distant noises. As the sky darkened, we built a fire and settled in, making a quick dinner over the flames. It was peaceful. The moon was bright, casting silver light across the water, and the air was cool but comfortable. I could hear the distant sounds of the main campground, shouts and laughter carrying through the trees, but it felt like another world. Here it was just us and the sounds of the woods. We sat up for a while, talking in the firelight, before finally crawling into the tent to sleep. The second night started off the same way. We spent most of the evening at the main campsite, eating, drinking, and catching up with people. Around midnight, we made our way back across the road, using our flashlights to find the path in the dark. The fire we'd made earlier had burned down to embers, and we let it die as we got ready for bed. Inside the tent, the three of us crawled into our sleeping bags, zipped up and settled in for the night. The air was cool, but the tent held some warmth, and I drifted off easily. Then, in the dead of night, something woke me. It was subtle at first, just the sense that something was wrong. A shift in the air. I lay still, blinking in the darkness, trying to figure out what had pulled me from sleep. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate movements outside the tent. My heart pounded. The sound was unmistakable. Something or someone was moving just beyond the thin fabric separating us from the night. I held my breath, listening. The steps were heavy, deliberate. Not the light, quick scamper of a raccoon or the cautious shuffle of a deer. They were slow, pacing, close. Then came the growl. Low, rumbling, deep in the chest. A cougar. It had to be. My stomach clenched. I knew there were mountain lions in the area, but I had never expected to encounter one, let alone have one just feet from my tent. I swallowed hard, panic tightening my throat. My mind raced through every piece of advice I had ever heard about mountain lions. Don't run, don't turn your back, make yourself look big. None of it applied when you were trapped inside a tent with no weapons. I didn't own a gun, and my knife was uselessly sitting in the car. I turned my head slowly toward the girl closest to me. She was asleep, her breath steady and slow. The other girl, further away, had a history of panicking, and I wasn't sure she'd handle this well if I woke her. I reached out, nudging the girl beside me. She stirred, inhaled sharply, and I felt her body tense as she registered the sounds outside. We lay still, listening. The growling came again. Then another sound, movement. More than one set of footsteps. There wasn't just one. There were two. Maybe more. I felt sick. Minutes dragged by like hours. My muscles ached from holding still, my breath coming in shallow, quiet gulps. The sounds continued, pacing, low growls, the occasional snap of twigs. We waited, tense, ready to fight for our lives if it came to that. Time lost meaning. I didn't know how long we lay there, frozen, listening to the predators circle our tent. My head spun with worst-case scenarios. If they attacked, we had nothing to defend ourselves with. We couldn't outrun them. We had no safe place to go. The night stretched on. I never fell back asleep. Neither did the girl beside me. Every tiny sound made my skin crawl, my heart hammer. Then, finally, the noises started to fade. The growls softened, the pacing grew more distant. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't dare believe it was over. I just lay there, every muscle locked, waiting. The forest was quiet again. The river still rushed in the distance. The leaves rustled in the breeze, but the predators were gone. We had survived. Morning came painfully slow. As soon as the sun began to rise, I sat up, stiff and exhausted. The other girl stirred, groaning as she stretched out. We unzipped the tent cautiously, stepping out into the early light. The air was crisp, the ground damp with morning dew. My heart was still pounding. I half expected to see paw prints in the dirt, signs of the creatures that had haunted our night. Instead, I found something else. Footprints, not animal prints, boot prints. My stomach twisted. I followed them, my hands shaking. They circled our tent. Several times. They led away toward the trees, then back again. I turned to the others, my mind racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Back at the main campsite, we found out the truth. It wasn't cougars. It had been a couple of guys from the other campsite. They had thought it would be funny to sneak over in the middle of the night, growling and prowling around our tent, pretending to be animals. We were in our 30s, grown adults. I wasn't angry, not exactly, more shaken than anything. That night had felt real, life or death. It didn't matter that it had been a prank. I had lived through the fear. I had spent hours in survival mode, convinced we might die. And I knew one thing for certain. I would never go camping again. I was 16 the summer I went to the United States as part of a student exchange program. It was my first time leaving home for so long, and I was placed with a host family in New Mexico. A place that, at first, felt almost like another world to me. The landscape was different from what I was used to. Dry air, red dirt, vast open spaces that seemed to stretch on forever. The nights were darker, the stars brighter, and the silence deeper than anything I had known back home. I stayed with a couple and their 2 daughters. The dad was a quiet but kind man, and the mom was friendly, always trying to make me feel welcome. Their daughters were around my age. The older one was 17, the younger 14. We got along well, and by the time my stay was coming to an end, they felt almost like siblings to me. Near the end of my time there, the family decided to take me on a camping trip. They said it was something special, one last adventure before I went home. I was excited. I had camped before, but never in a place like this. We packed up the truck and drove for what felt like hours, the roads getting narrower, the towns disappearing behind us. Eventually, we reached the spot. It was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and hills, far from any other people. We set up camp quickly, tents, a small fire, and a few folding chairs arranged in a loose circle. As the sun started to set, the air cooled, and the sky turned a deep, endless blue. The fire crackled, sending up little sparks, and the smell of burning wood mixed with the scent of the dry earth. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. At some point, after we had eaten and were just sitting around, the 2 girls suggested we climb a tree. It wasn't far from the camp, maybe 50 meters or so into the woods. We could still see the firelight flickering through the trees. It seemed harmless enough. We picked a sturdy-looking tree, one with thick branches that were easy to grip. I followed them up, my hands getting scraped by the rough bark. The older girl went first, the younger one after her, and I climbed last. By the time we reached the highest point we felt comfortable with, we could see out over the tops of the trees. The view was incredible, miles and miles of dark forest stretching out in every direction. We sat there for a while, just taking it in. The air was still, the only sounds the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. It was one of those moments that felt like it could last forever. Just quiet, just peaceful. Then we heard it, a voice. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then it came again. It was my name, clear as day. It wasn't just someone calling my name. It was the younger girl's voice calling my name. I looked down immediately. She was sitting just below me on a branch, completely silent. She hadn't said a word, but I heard it again. My name, spoken in her exact tone, her exact voice, coming from somewhere beyond the trees. I felt every hair on my body stand up. She looked up at me, her expression mirroring my own shock. I knew she heard it too. The older girl had gone stiff, her breathing shallow, her hands gripping the branch so tightly her knuckles were white. Kept calling, over and over, the exact same way, the exact same voice. I remember staring into the trees, trying to make out a shape, something, anything, but there was nothing, just darkness. The way the voice came, it wasn't moving closer, but it wasn't staying in one place either. It was hard to tell where it was coming from. The trees made the sound feel like it was surrounding us, like it was slipping between the branches, curling through the air. We sat there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Couldn't have been more than 5 minutes, but time stretched and twisted in that moment. Every second felt stretched thin. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Even the insects had gone quiet. Without a word, we climbed down as fast as we could. My hands slipped on the bark, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The second my feet touched the ground, we ran. Not a single glance back, not a second of hesitation. We ran through the trees, branches scratching at our arms, tripping over roots, breath ragged and panicked. We burst into the clearing where the fire still burned low. The parents were sitting by it, relaxed, unaware of what had just happened. We must have looked insane. We tried to explain, stumbling over our words, out of breath, but the second we did, the second we got the words out, the dad's face changed. I have never seen a man go so pale so fast. He didn't say anything at first, just stood up, looked out toward the trees, then back at us. Then he told us to pack our things. No discussion, no questions. We didn't argue. Within 5 minutes, we were throwing everything into the truck. The fire was left burning low, the tents still half-staked to the ground. The drive back was silent. None of us spoke. I remember watching the trees rush past outside the window, my stomach still knotted, my mind racing. What had we heard? Who? Asterisk asterisk what asterisk asterisk. Had been out there. I kept expecting to see something in the rearview mirror. Some shape standing at the edge of the woods, watching us go. But there was nothing. When we got back, we unloaded the truck in silence. The dad barely looked at us. His face was still pale, his hands stiff as he grabbed the bags. He never explained, never said a word about why we left so fast. The next morning, I asked about it. He just shook his head. "Forget it," he said, and that was the end of it. I never brought it up again. To this day, I don't know what we heard. I don't know what was out there in the trees that night, calling my name in a voice that wasn't its own. And I don't think I ever will. I don't remember exactly how I ended up by the river in Benares that day, only that I had been drifting through India for a while, moving from one place to another, smoking, meeting people, getting high, and repeating the cycle. It was the kind of life where plans changed by the hour and strangers became companions overnight. That's how I met the hippies. A couple of them. Barefoot, sunburned, their clothes loose and faded, their eyes always half-lidded with some mixture of peace and intoxication. We got to talking, and as it often happens in places like that, we bonded over what we had to share. I had hash, a good amount of it, and they had happy pills of all kinds. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were sprawled by the riverbank, high as kites, swapping stories that probably didn't make much sense. Then came the plan. "We're heading to Rishikesh," one of them had said earlier in the evening, his voice a slow drawl. "Going to camp in the forest. Rishikesh, 500 kilometers away." It sounded like a great idea at the time. The forest, the river, the mountains, it all seemed perfect. And why not? I had nothing holding me back. By the time we finally set off, our small group had grown. We picked up more people on the way, drifters like us, all heading nowhere in particular, all looking for something, though none of us could probably say what that something was. By the time we reached our destination, we were 13 in total. The one who led us was a German woman. She seemed to know the area well, talking about an abandoned hut on the edge of the forest, right by the river. "We won't even have to set up tents," she'd said. It made sense. Most of us didn't even have proper camping gear. The place sounded perfect. And when we got there, the hut was massive, like an old guest house that had been forgotten. The walls were weathered, the wooden beams dark and cracked from years of exposure. It sat right at the edge of the trees, with the river flowing just a short walk away. The air smelled damp, fresh with the scent of earth and water. The moment we arrived, we spread out, taking over the space as if it had been waiting for us all along. The night was a blur of smoke and laughter. Somebody had built a fire outside, and we sat around it, passing joints, swallowing whatever pills were being handed out, letting the night carry us into whatever state it wanted. The sound of the river was hypnotic, blending with the crackle of the flames and the occasional burst of laughter from someone too high to keep quiet. I don't remember when I passed out, only that everything faded into a warm, slow darkness. Then I woke up, and everything was wrong. The high had turned. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold, something tight. My heart was hammering so hard in my chest that I thought it might explode. My breath came fast, too fast, like I couldn't pull in enough air. The walls of the hut, the very air around me, felt like they were closing in. I was dying. I knew I was dying. I sat up too fast, my vision swimming. The room was dark, the fire outside had burned low, and the only light came from the moon filtering through the open doorway. I could barely make out the shapes of the others' bodies sprawled out on the floor, on makeshift bedding, on whatever space they had found. They weren't moving. My stomach twisted violently. I crawled to the closest person, nudging them. Nothing. My breath hitched. I shook them harder. Nothing. One by one, I went to them, shaking, pushing, trying to wake them up. No one moved. I was surrounded by the dead. The panic hit like a wave, rising from my gut, crashing over me until I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I felt my hands claw at my own chest, my own throat, as if trying to rip open space for more air. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. I think I fell to the ground then, curled in on myself, waiting for the end. Time stopped making sense. Minutes? Hours? I don't know. I only know that, at some point, the wave of panic receded just enough for me to move again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely roll a joint, but I did. My fingers fumbled with the paper, with the hash, with the lighter. It took forever, but finally, I inhaled, the familiar burn of smoke filling my lungs. And just like that, the world steadied. My heart slowed. The walls stopped closing in. I could breathe again. I sat there in the half-dark, the joint burning between my fingers, staring at the unmoving bodies around me. My mind was still raw, still tinged with fear, but logic had started creeping back in. They weren't dead. They were just high, too high to wake up, too deep in whatever world their minds had taken them to. It wasn't just me. Later, as the night stretched on, others started waking up. 3 of them reacting exactly like I had, waking in terror, convinced they were dying, convinced everyone else was dead. I could see the panic in their faces, the way their hands shook, the way they gasped for air, eyes wild with fear. I passed them the joint. Eventually, the sun rose. The others woke up, groggy, unaware of the nightmare the night had been. Some of them laughed at how wrecked we looked. No one else had experienced what we had. That was it for me. No more pills. No more whatever the fuck had sent me spiraling into that hell. For the rest of the trip, I stuck to weed. Nothing else. Nothing stronger. And when it was all over, when we finally drifted away from each other, back into whatever roads our lives were taking us, I never saw any of them again. But I still remember that night. I still remember waking up and believing, truly believing, that I was going to die. And that feeling, that kind of fear, it never really goes away. I woke up slowly, groggy and unsure of what had disturbed me. At first, I thought it was just the wind, rattling the outer walls of the large canvas tent that housed the 4 smaller tents inside. It had been a long, exhausting day of trekking through the Peruvian highlands, crossing rugged terrain beneath towering peaks, and my body ached from the effort. I wanted nothing more than to sink back into the warmth of my sleeping bag, but something felt off. Then the pressure came again. Something heavy pushed against the side of my tent, pressing the fabric inward. It wasn't a sudden impact like someone stumbling into it. It was slow, deliberate, and solid. The material flexed inward, bending against a weight that was no small thing. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. We were camping at high altitude, somewhere above 10,000 feet, near the base of the Saucante Pass. It was cold, and the wind howled through the valleys, but whatever was outside wasn't just the wind. It had mass. It had intent. My mind raced through the possibilities, none of them comforting. A puma? I knew they lived in these mountains, but would one actually push against a tent like this? If it were a predator, I should be hearing claws scraping, maybe sniffing, or worse, growling. But there was none of that. A bear? Did Peru even have bears? I tried to remember, but my tired brain couldn't recall. I knew of the spectacled bear, but I had no idea if they lived at this altitude or if they ever ventured into human camps. Or was it something else? Something unknown? I hated how my brain immediately conjured up the idea of some kind of Andean yeti, a creature born from old legends and local folklore. I didn't believe in that stuff, but in the dark, with something large pressing against my tent, my rational mind wasn't in charge anymore. Then the sound came, a deep, heavy grunt, followed by breathing, loud, deliberate breathing. Whatever was out there wasn't small. This thing had lungs, massive lungs, and the sheer weight of its exhalations sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I lay there, staring at the curved fabric of my tent wall, watching the way it shifted with each push from the outside. I didn't want to wake everyone by shouting, but I also didn't want to do nothing. I considered yelling, maybe banging on the tent wall to scare it off, but if this thing was a predator, that might just provoke it. More than that, I didn't want to look weak. We had a mixed group of trekkers, both men and women, and while I didn't know everyone well, I wasn't eager to be the guy who screamed in the middle of the night over something that turned out to be nothing. If I was gonna wake people up, it better be for a damn good reason. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Whatever was outside, it wasn't tearing through the tent. It wasn't attacking. That meant I had time. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the zipper of my tent. The sound of the metal teeth separating seemed impossibly loud in the silent night. I inched it down, pausing with every few inches, listening for any reaction from outside. The breathing continued, steady and unfazed. When the opening was big enough, I slid out of my sleeping bag and began to crawl forward. My fingers dug into the cold ground as I eased my body through the gap, moving as quietly as possible. My heart pounded in my chest as I lifted my head, peering into the darkness beyond the thin fabric walls. And then I saw it. A massive, long-horned bovine stood just inches from my face. For a moment, neither of us moved. Its dark eyes were wide and unreadable, reflecting the faint moonlight that filtered through the thin walls of our outer shelter. Its nostrils flared, and another warm breath huffed out, sending a cloud of mist into the cold air. A cow. A goddamn cow. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly followed by a new problem. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I had grown up around farms, so I knew a thing or two about cattle. This wasn't a wild animal. It had the relaxed posture of a domesticated beast, probably left to graze by local shepherds who used the highlands for pasture. But even a docile cow could cause trouble, especially when it weighed over 1,000 pounds and didn't seem particularly inclined to move. The cow let out another low, rumbling snort and shifted its weight, pressing once again against the side of my tent. Nope, not happening. I wasn't about to spend the night crushed under a confused bovine. I needed to get it out of the shelter. Moving slowly, I adjusted my posture, making myself appear larger. I lifted my arms wide, careful not to make any sudden movements. Then, in the low, rhythmic tones that farmers use to move cattle, I made a series of noises, not quite words, but the drawn-out, familiar sounds that animals recognized as a gentle push. The cow flicked an ear but didn't move. I tried again, stepping forward slightly, maintaining slow, deliberate movements. Finally, it shifted, taking a single step backward. Then another. Good. I kept at it, slowly guiding it in reverse, step by step, like some kind of reverse matador. The cow snorted in protest once or twice, but it didn't resist. After what felt like an eternity, I finally backed it out of the outer tent and into the cold, open night. Once it was clear of the shelter, the cow seemed to lose interest in me entirely. It stood there for a few moments, as if considering its options, then wandered off into the darkness without so much as a glance back. I let out a long breath, my muscles finally relaxing. Shaking my head, I turned back toward my tent, slipping inside as quietly as I had left. The air inside was warmer, and my sleeping bag welcomed me like an old friend. My heart rate was still coming down, but I could already feel sleep pulling at the edges of my mind. Tomorrow I'd have a good story to tell. For now, I was just grateful that my late-night visitor hadn't been anything worse. Camping had always been a part of my childhood. My family wasn't the type to take vacations to big cities or amusement parks. Instead, we packed up our tents, fishing gear, and coolers filled with simple meals and spent our weekends in the quiet of the woods. It was the kind of life that felt normal to me. I didn't know any different. The sound of wind through trees, the feeling of dirt and gravel under my shoes, the scent of a campfire burning down to glowing embers. Those were the things that made me feel at home. I was 12 the summer this happened. We had set up camp near a lake, a place we had visited before but never for this long. This time, we were staying for almost a week. The lake had a dam at one end, built up with medium to large rocks stacked in a way that let water seep through in places, forming small pools between the stones. It was a great place to fish, especially if you were patient enough to let your line settle in the water and wait. That was something I had learned to do over the years. I wasn't always good at sitting still, but when it came to fishing, I could be patient. On one particular afternoon, I had wandered off on my own to fish along the dam. The sun was still high, but the heat was starting to ease up as it got later in the day. I walked carefully across the rocks, testing each step before shifting my weight. Some of the gaps between them were big enough that if you weren't careful, you could twist an ankle or worse. I had my fishing rod in one hand and my tackle box in the other, scanning for a good spot to settle in. The air smelled like lake water and damp stone, with a faint breeze pushing small ripples across the surface of the water. As I moved along, I heard something behind me, a faint rustling, like leaves shifting. I turned my head, expecting to see a squirrel or a bird moving through the underbrush near the edge of the dam. But there was nothing, just stillness. I stood there for a second, listening. The only sounds were the wind and the occasional lap of water against the rocks below. I shrugged it off and kept walking, probably just my imagination. A few steps later, I heard it again. This time, I turned more quickly, eyes scanning the ground behind me. A few dry leaves shifted ever so slightly in the breeze, but I didn't see anything that could have caused the noise. A chipmunk, maybe, or a lizard scuttling between the rocks. I wasn't worried. I found a good spot and stopped, positioning my feet carefully on the uneven surface. I set my tackle box down beside me and leaned forward slightly, peering into a small pool of water that had collected between the rocks. The surface was calm, reflecting the bright blue of the sky above. Then something moved. At first, I thought it was just a shadow shifting in the water. But then I saw it, a head lifting slowly from the pool, breaking the surface. A snake, right between my legs. It took me a second to process what I was looking at. The head rose higher, and I could see the curve of its neck, the slick shine of its scales catching the light. It wasn't a small one either. It was long enough that I couldn't see where its body ended beneath the water. For a moment, I was frozen. My whole body locked up, my breath caught in my throat. Couldn't move, couldn't think. The snake's head turned slightly, and I swear it was looking right at me. Then instinct kicked in. I jumped back so fast I nearly lost my footing. My heart was hammering, my breath coming fast as I scrambled away from the pool, putting as much distance as I could between me and the water. My tackle box tipped over, spilling some of its contents onto the rocks, but I didn't care. I wasn't thinking about anything except getting away. I didn't stop moving until I was back on solid ground, away from the dam, away from the rocks. Only then did I turn back, scanning the spot where I had been standing. The snake was gone. The water was still again, the surface unbroken. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard, trying to slow my racing heart. I had seen snakes before, but never that close. Never in a way that made me feel so completely trapped. It had been right between my legs. If I had moved just a little differently, if I had stepped in the wrong place, I shuddered and turned away. I didn't go back to the dam that day. That night, after dinner, we sat around the picnic table playing cards. My mom, my sister, a couple of cousins. We were all gathered around, laughing and talking as the gas lamp beside us cast a soft glow over the table. The night was chilly, but not uncomfortably so. The kind of crisp air that made you want to pull your jacket a little tighter around you. The smell of the campfire lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of pine and earth. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of water lapping against the shore. It was peaceful, perfect camping night. Then my mom went quiet. I didn't notice at first. I was too focused on my cards, trying to decide whether to fold or keep playing. But then I felt it, that shift in the air. The way everyone else had gone still. I looked up. My mom's eyes were locked on something beneath the table. Her expression was serious, her mouth set in a firm line. Then slowly, she stood up. Without a word, the rest of us followed her lead. I still didn't know what was happening, but I obeyed. Something about the way she was acting told me this wasn't a joke. Then I saw it. Moving slowly beneath the picnic table, weaving its way through our feet, was a skunk. It wasn't in a hurry. It wasn't acting aggressive. It was just there, casually making its way through our campsite like it belonged there. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. I held my breath, watching as it sniffed around, its black and white fur standing out in the dim light. It paused near my feet, and I felt my muscles lock up, the same way they had earlier that day with the snake. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Then, as casually as it had arrived, the skunk moved on. It wandered a few feet away, sniffed at the ground, then disappeared into the darkness beyond the edge of our campsite. We stood there for a long moment, still frozen, still waiting. Then my mom let out a slow breath and sat back down. The rest of us followed. The game continued, but the mood had changed. We were all a little more aware of our surroundings, a little more careful. That was the thing about camping. You could never completely relax. The woods were always watching, always waiting. You never knew what might wander into your space. And sometimes it was closer than you ever wanted it to be. The North Georgia mountains were supposed to be an escape. A long weekend of fresh air, cold beer, and good company away from school and the everyday grind. That was the plan anyway. 5 days in the woods with a group of friends. Just us, the trees, and the open sky. We packed for it like we meant it. No half-assed sleeping bags and cheap flashlights. My buddy and I had enough camping experience between us to do it right. He was an Army vet, which meant we were going in with a well-thought-out setup. A 10-person tent for the 5 of us, cots, a propane stove, a portable shower, the works. We were in it for the long haul. We left Wednesday afternoon, driving out to a small town on the edge of the mountains where we could park the truck and hike the rest of the way in. The group was made up of 5 people, me, my buddy, and 3 girls. It was the kind of group dynamic where there was already some light flirting going on, the kind of easy tension that comes with knowing you'd be sharing a tent in the middle of nowhere. The hike started off normal. It was late summer, still warm, but not unbearable. We had the weight of our packs digging into our shoulders, but we were fresh, making good time through the forest. We took our time, stopping here and there for water, snapping a few pictures on our phones, talking about what we were going to cook first once we set up camp. Then we reached the clearing. It was one of those places that should have felt peaceful. A wide break in the trees, a small lake in the center, the water so still it looked like glass. But something about it wasn't right. The moment we stepped into that open space, the world just stopped. No birds, no rustling leaves, no wind, just dead silence. I felt my stomach tighten, and I could tell my buddy felt it too. We exchanged a quick glance, the kind that doesn't need words. Both of us reached for our guns. Neither of us said anything to the girls. No point in freaking them out. Predator, I thought. That's the logical answer. A big cat, maybe a black bear, something that had the smaller animals hushing up, staying still, hoping not to be noticed. Then my buddy grabbed my arm. He nodded toward the opposite side of the lake. There, just at the tree line, stood a woman. She was far enough away that I couldn't make out her face. Maybe 150 yards. She wasn't moving, just standing at the very edge of the trees. At first, I figured she must have lived somewhere nearby. A remote cabin, maybe. Some off-the-grid homestead. But I still didn't like it. Something about the way she stood there, still as stone, made my skin crawl. We didn't linger. We walked straight past the clearing, back into the trees. I glanced over my shoulder one last time before we disappeared into the woods. She was gone. The sounds of the forest came back the moment we were under the trees again. The birds, the rustling, the wind. The normal rhythm of nature returning like nothing had happened. I tried to shake it off. Maybe she just walked away. Maybe she lived nearby. Maybe. We pushed another 2 miles in before deciding to stop for the night. The sun was getting low, and none of us wanted to be stuck setting up camp in the dark. We made a good spot for ourselves. Cleared some ground, set up the big tent, got a fire going. Someone cracked open a beer, and just like that, the tension started to fade. I was feeling pretty good by then. Relaxed. That edge of unease from the clearing was still there, but it was buried under the familiar comforts of a warm fire and a cold drink. The girl I'd been flirting with was sitting next to me. We'd been talking, laughing, touching shoulders just enough times for it to feel intentional. At some point, she asked if I'd help her set up something in the tent. We slipped away from the fire. We were inside for a few minutes when she suddenly stopped. Her whole body tensed. I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong, but she shook her head. Then I noticed it. Silence. The exact same unnatural silence from the clearing. The fire outside was still crackling, but the forest itself had gone dead quiet. She must have seen the look on my face because we both dressed quickly and stepped outside. The others were still sitting around the fire, laughing like nothing had changed. They hadn't noticed a thing. We didn't say anything. No point. The first morning, we woke up to find the propane stove had been turned on overnight. It wasn't lit, but the fuel had run empty. No one admitted to using it. We brushed it off as an accident. Maybe someone had bumped into it, twisted the knob without realizing it. The second morning, we woke up to things missing. A lantern we'd left by the fire. A sweatshirt one of the girls had left draped over a folding chair. Gone. It didn't feel right, but we didn't have a real explanation. Later that day, we hiked upstream, following the river, looking for a waterfall we'd read about. That's when it happened again. The silence. My buddy was the first to notice. He nudged me and nodded toward the top of a hill. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. She was there. Same woman, same clothes, standing motionless among the trees. She wasn't close, but she wasn't far enough away to make me feel comfortable. My buddy told the girls he saw a mountain lion and was gonna scare it off. He climbed the hill, making a lot of noise, but when he got to the top, she was gone. The girls didn't ask too many questions. The moment passed, and the excitement of finding the waterfall took over. They swam. We laughed, felt normal again. Then we got back to camp, and it was a mess. Not completely destroyed, but disturbed. Food bags ripped open, clothes knocked off chairs, the tent partially unzipped. The girls asked if it was raccoons. I told them yeah. That night I didn't sleep. None of us did. The silence came again, sometime deep in the night. I felt my crush tighten her grip on my arm. I opened my eyes and saw my buddy sitting up, looking around. The forest was dead. No wind, no bugs, just stillness. And then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not from inside the tent. Not from right outside either. Somewhere just out of sight. Moving, stopping, moving again. We stayed awake until the first hint of light. Then we packed up and left. The hike back to town was silent. Too silent. The forest never really came back to life. Now and then, I thought I saw her through the trees. Not close, not clear, just far enough that I couldn't make out her face. None of us spoke until we reached the truck. Once we were driving back, the stories started coming out. Little moments, glimpses, feelings. Each of us had seen her at some point. Each of us had moments where we felt watched. But we'd all ignored it, hoping she'd go away. None of us could remember her face, and I never went camping again. I don't know why we thought that trail was a good idea. Looking back, maybe it was just the excitement of the trip. It was a camping trip my family had been planning for months. Something to break away from the routines of life. A chance to be out in the fresh air, away from work, school, and everything else. My best friend was with us, which made it even better, and we had my dog, Daisy, along for the adventure. The campsite itself was beautiful, nestled in a thick patch of woods by a deep lake, but the trails were rough. They weren't the kind of smooth, well-groomed bike trails you'd find in a park. These were raw, cut through the forest, uneven with loose gravel, tree roots, and sudden sharp turns that made biking on them a challenge. The one we took that day stretched for 13 miles, looping around the lake and through the dense forest before circling back to camp. It was supposed to be an easy ride, just a way to spend the afternoon, taking in the scenery and enjoying the cool air. First, it was exactly that. The trail twisted through the trees, the scent of pine heavy in the air. Leaves crunched under our tires, and every now and then, a squirrel would dart across the path, vanishing into the underbrush. The lake was visible in some spots through the gaps in the trees, sunlight reflecting off its surface. It was peaceful, the kind of ride that made you forget about everything else. Daisy had been well-behaved all day. She trotted beside my dad, her leash secured in his grip, keeping pace without issue. She was a strong dog, always full of energy, but she had been listening well, sticking close. That gave us a false sense of security, I think. We didn't realize how quickly things could change. After about an hour of riding, we reached a section of the trail that immediately made me uneasy. It was narrow, far narrower than the parts we had been riding on before. To the right, there was a steep hill, densely packed with trees and rocks, climbing sharply upward. But it was the left side that made my stomach tighten. The land had caved away at some point in the past, leaving a steep, nearly vertical drop-off down to the lake. The slope was nothing but loose dirt, gravel, and dead leaves, and it ran straight into the water. It was the kind of hill that, if you lost your footing, there was no stopping. There were no trees or solid ground to catch yourself on. Just a long, painful slide straight into the lake below. We should have turned back then. The path was barely wide enough for a bike, let alone a person walking beside one. But we had already come so far, and there wasn't really another way back that didn't involve doubling the distance we'd already traveled. So we kept going. I rode ahead, carefully maneuvering my bike along the narrow trail, keeping my focus locked on the ground in front of me. My best friend was just behind me, followed by my dad, who still had Daisy on the leash. My mom was taking up the rear. We moved slowly, cautiously, knowing that one wrong move could send us over the edge. The trail felt even tighter with the bikes, the loose gravel shifting slightly under the weight of the tires. Then Daisy decided she wanted to explore. She had been so good the whole ride. She hadn't pulled at the leash, hadn't stopped to sniff every little thing like she usually did. But for whatever reason, at that moment, she decided she needed to get closer to the edge. I didn't see it happen. I just heard the sudden scuff of movement behind me, the sharp intake of breath from my dad. When I glanced back, everything slowed. Daisy's paws were skidding against the loose dirt, her body angled toward the slope. Her claws dug in, trying to find something solid, but the ground was too unstable. Her leash pulled tight as my dad instinctively yanked back, but the sudden force unbalanced him. I watched as his body tilted, his bike wobbling beneath him. For a split second, I thought I was about to watch them both go over the edge. My dad was strong, but the combination of Daisy's weight and the momentum of the pull was too much. His feet scrambled for a grip, but there was nothing solid to plant them on. I wanted to move, to do something, but there was nothing I could do. The trail was too tight, and if I lunged forward, I might have made things worse. Daisy let out a panicked yelp as her front legs slipped over the edge, her body twisting to try to regain footing. My dad's whole body lurched sideways with her, and for that brief moment, I thought that was it. They were going down. Somehow, impossibly, my dad caught himself. I don't know how. I don't know if it was instinct, luck, or some mixture of both, but he managed to jerk himself upright. He hoisted Daisy back, his muscles straining, his face pale. His bike wobbled but stayed upright as he dug his feet in. It was over in seconds, but it felt like minutes. For a long moment, none of us moved. We just stood there, my dad breathing hard, his knuckles white around the leash. Daisy was shaking, her ears pinned back, suddenly much less interested in exploring. No one said anything. We just got back on our bikes and moved forward, carefully, cautiously, all of us hyper-aware of the steep drop beside us. By the time we made it back to the wider part of the trail, my legs felt weak. My heart was still pounding in my ears. The image of my dad tipping over the edge burned into my mind. We finished the ride, but I didn't enjoy the rest of it. The whole way back, I kept glancing over at Daisy, at my dad, at the path ahead, as if something else might go wrong at any moment. When we finally reached camp, we sat down without speaking for a long time, just absorbing what had happened. We never took that trail again. I didn't expect it to be easy. That wasn't the point. The idea was simple. A one-night out and back through the mountainous rainforest of southern Brazil. A friend and I were prepping for a longer trip in Patagonia, and we needed to test our gear and our endurance. Neither of us was new to hiking, but the terrain in this part of the country was known to be brutal, steep, humid, and slow-going. That was fine. We weren't here for a leisurely stroll. We just wanted to push ourselves, and push ourselves we did. From the moment we stepped onto the trail, it was nothing but climbing. The rainforest was dense, the humidity near 100%, and within minutes, sweat soaked through my shirt, rolling down my back in thick, uncomfortable waves. Even when we stopped to catch our breath, there was no relief. The air itself felt heavy, pressing down on me, making each inhale thick and wet. It didn't matter that we were in good shape. The heat and the terrain worked together to drain us with every step. Hours passed. It wasn't a hike so much as a battle against the landscape. Thick vegetation slowed us down, our boots slipping in the damp earth, tree roots tangling beneath our feet. The higher we climbed, the worse it got. We were inside the clouds now, drenched to the bone not just from sweat but from the moisture in the air. My arms and legs were slick with dampness, my pack soaked through, my skin raw where my shirt chafed against my shoulders. It was miserable, but there was a strange kind of peace in the misery. Up here, there were no mosquitoes, no buzzing insects, no animals watching from the trees. Just birds, their distant calls the only sound other than our own labored breathing. By early evening, after nearly 8 grueling hours, we stumbled upon a rare patch of flat ground. It wasn't much, just a slight clearing where the trees thinned out, the ground sunken and soft with collected rainwater. But it was good enough. The rain had started up again, heavier this time, drumming against the leaves above us, soaking us further as we hurried to set up camp. I didn't even bother looking for a dry spot. There wasn't one. I pitched my tent in several inches of standing water, crawled inside, and lay back against my damp sleeping bag. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but I wasn't ready to sleep yet. My clothes were sticking to me, my muscles aching from the relentless climb, and the rain outside made the air inside the tent feel thick and suffocating. So instead of sleeping, I read. And then, at around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of singing. At first, I thought I had dreamed it. The voice was distant, drifting through the trees, soft and melodic. A woman's voice, singing in Portuguese. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was light, almost lullaby-like, the melody carried along by the wind and the falling rain. I lay still, listening. The voice didn't stay distant. It was moving, getting closer. The rain masked the sound of footsteps, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was walking towards us, following the same trail we had taken earlier. The singing continued, clear and rhythmic, though something about it sounded off. Couldn't place why. Maybe it was the way the melody wavered slightly, like she was struggling to keep her voice steady. I lay frozen in my tent, waiting. Then she passed. The singing didn't stop. It grew louder as she moved right past our tents, so close I could hear her breathing between verses. My heart pounded against my ribs, my mind racing to make sense of it. And then, just as steadily as it had approached, the singing began to fade, moving further down the trail, swallowed again by the rain. I lay there, staring up at the dark ceiling of my tent. I didn't move. Did my friend hear it? Was he awake? I didn't call out to check. Something about it didn't feel right. There was no good reason for someone to be out here alone in the middle of the night. This was a remote trail, not a well-traveled one. We hadn't seen another hiker all day, and yet she had been here. I forced myself to breathe, to close my eyes, to tell myself it was fine. People did weird things. Maybe she was hiking alone and liked to sing to herself. Maybe she was making her way down the mountain in the dark for some reason. I tried to push it from my mind. An hour later, I woke up to the singing again, distant once more, coming back. I stared at the fabric of my tent, my pulse hammering. She was retracing her steps, moving toward us again, following the same path she had taken an hour before. The song was the same, but something about it had changed. There was an edge to it now, a slight exasperation in her voice. She passed us again. And once more, the singing faded into the distance, continuing back in the direction of the trailhead. I didn't sleep. I lay there, listening, every muscle in my body tight with unease. Another hour passed, and then, for the third time, the singing returned. I knew it would happen before I even heard it. I don't know how. Some instinct, some deep part of my brain that had already picked up on the pattern. This time, she wasn't just singing. She was crying. The soft, rhythmic melody was now interrupted by sharp, ragged breaths. The sound of someone struggling to keep their composure, to keep going. It was quiet, but in the stillness of the night, I could hear every painful hitch in her throat. The song continued. The crying continued. She moved past us again. This time, she didn't come back. When the sky lightened and the rain finally eased, I crawled out of my tent, my entire body aching from exhaustion and stiffness. My friend was already up, standing near the tree line, his face pale and drawn. He met my eyes. Neither of us spoke at first. We didn't need to. We both heard it. Eventually, I muttered, "What the fuck was that?" He shook his head. "I don't know." We packed up camp quickly. Neither of us was in the mood for breakfast. The rain had left the trail even worse than before, slick and muddy, but we didn't care. We just wanted to get down the mountain. I kept expecting to see something. A sign of where she had gone, footprints in the mud, something to prove that she had been real. But the rain had washed everything away. We reached the trailhead by early afternoon, stepping out of the dense forest and into the relative normalcy of the lower elevations. We didn't talk about it much after that. Not because we forgot, but because there wasn't anything to say. She had been real. We had no explanation for her, and that was enough.